good to see everyone. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about something I never talked about in my class because, well, a variety of reasons. It's too fraught with all kinds of contemporary political uh, emotions. But I think it needs to be done because we're about to approach the Christian era of Western intellectual history. And they have some serious input here that I think it would be neglectful not to mention it. I think, and so what I'm going to talk about today is misogyny, and I do think religions play a big role in this. Although one of the reasons I don't talk about social issues very much is because they don't lend themselves to empirical verification very often. Uh, I'm not going to claim that I know exactly where misogyny comes from. I mean, for example, our closest relatives, chimps, are patriarchal, but our other closest relatives, bonobos, are matriarchal. There are human societies today that are matriarchal. And so to try to ferret out all the causes and effects of what misogyny there is in our contemporary society, or even the degree to which there is misogyny, my God, if you go online right now and you want to see the opinions of women and men about the rights of women or what women ought to be doing, oh my God, it's a nightmare. I'm glad I'm not 20 years old in the dating world. You guys probably, how many of you have grandchildren or children that are in that world? Is it really as bad and horrible as it seems?
Don't know.
You don't know. I mean, oh my God. I mean, if you're a guy, you've got on the one hand, you've got girls saying they're empowered and making millions of dollars on OnlyFans, and on the other, you've got people who are outraged that women are being objectified. So, as a guy, it's a minefield. I don't know how these guys. Anyway, it wasn't that easy when I was 20 either, to be fair. Anyway, so what I want to talk about today is uh, I think Christianity probably, it's not unfair to attribute it with more misogyny than we typically see, for instance, in Greece or in other religions, even Islam and um, Hinduism. Hinduism is like Greek religion in that it has a lot of female gods who are powerful and not to be trifled with. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism don't have a female god, but as I think I mentioned, there is a cult of Mary in Christianity that grew from about the fifth century up to the High Middle Ages were probably the peak of the Mary cult, but we have, many churches and schools and named St. Mary's, and Mary is not a god in Christianity. I think the word that the official term about her is that we venerate her, we don't worship her. It's kind of slicing and dicing your vocabulary, but it kind of seems to me that somehow the core of Christian psychology missed a female god, and so the cult of Mary is not in the Bible really. Uh, she's a saint now, but she was a character in the Bible. And so what I'm going to do is review a little bit of the Old Testament women and the New Testament sayings about women, and you make your own judgments about them. I think some of them are a little bit shocking. But before I do that, let me review for a second the Greeks, because they didn't agree either. about the status of women. There was a difference between Plato and Aristotle. Um, uh, I have a passage from the Republic here. Uh, Plato here talking about the guardians. Now, to be fair, this isn't that commonly referenced. When you're talking about the Republic, the things people talk about are not so much this. But one of the things about the Republic is that the guardians live kind of like hippies. It's a commune. They can't profit over their decisions. The wives are shared. The children are shared. It's it's quite a weird situation to our modern ear. But anyway, um, here's what Plato says about women. Must not be surprised then if women are found to be as capable as men of sharing in all the qualities and occupations of the guardians. In the best city, both women and men will exercise the same functions and will share in the same education. The only difference being that the one is weaker and the other stronger. And by that he means physically weaker. Let them share in the toils of war and the defense of our country, only in, or their country, only in the distribution of labors, the lighter are to be assigned to the women who are the weaker natures. But in other respects, their duties are the same. Uh, you'll have to agree that well, first of all, it's not what was the standard belief in the society that Plato lived in. Remember, this is an idealized uh, civilization he's talking about. He's quite straightforward about this. It's never existed and probably never will exist. It's a thought experiment, and I explained that before. So, but nevertheless, you kind of have to wonder. Plato came up with these quite radical ideas for his day, and I don't see that they had a lot of influence then or now. Maybe more now than then. But anyway, that was not the way society was organized in any civilization, major civilization that I know of. There was nothing like that egalitarian attitude towards women and their potential authority. Nothing like that. On the other hand, Mr. Aristotle, as I've said, was the student of Plato for 20 years, he views women as imperfect men. I'm going to the Greeks first because this is prior to the actual Bible. It's not prior to the Old Testament, though. So it's a little bit of a mishmash way, but the Greeks didn't know about the Bible, so they weren't influenced by that. Anyway, going back to Aristotle. Remember, Aristotle had the four causes, and one of the causes was the purpose. And he viewed women as imperfect men, and he viewed he thought they were passive in reproduction, which is but anyway, that's what he says. Men were the active force, women were the kind of the receptacles and passive in reproduction, which is okay. They possess reason, but not the kind of reason that is superior to men's. They have an inferior reason. Political role, they're not fit for citizenship or governance. This is all Aristotle now. Ethics, they are capable of virtue, but only within their domestic role. And they are naturally subordinate to men. There's a passage that I don't have with me right now where he says that, you remember the four causes. He has the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. So the final cause is the purpose. He kind of says that women possess the material cause of life. In other words, they are the life givers in that respect. But they are the purpose of man is best exemplified. The purpose of humans is best exemplified by men, and men should rule. This is what he sees as the right order. Remember, everything has its place. Going back to Moira, everything has its place and its purpose. And the purpose of women is not to rule, it's to be subservient because they don't possess the sort of mentality that is suitable for ruling. And this is also, as I mentioned before, the basis of racism. When the in the colonial era, it was thought that white people I don't know. White people possess the rationality and the reason that the people they were colonizing didn't possess. And so the colonizers were doing them a favor by ruling them because they didn't have the capacity to rule themselves. That was really what the colonists thought. And they were providing them with the word of God, which would supersede all their stupid religions. This is really the mentality of the colonists. Okay. Uh, Now, getting on to Christianity, I'm going to start with, oh, I want to say one other thing. It's not clear whether Plato, it seems as though there were women in the school that Plato ran, but there was one notable woman who had to disguise herself as a man to attend, and she was a very good student. Um, uh, Axiothea was her name. And then there was another one named Lasthenia. So there were a few women in the academy. Uh, the We don't have any evidence in Aristotle's school, the Lyceum, of any women uh, attending. The Pythagoreans did have women. They were very inclusive in their cult. The Epicureans also had women in their cult, and the Stoics thought that women were theoretically equal in reason. So I didn't want to skip over those guys. We don't have time to go through every detail of all this, but now let's turn to Christianity. One of the main themes that's going to run through Christianity is the idea that in Genesis, it was Eve who ate, who first ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was tempted by Satan, and she yielded to the temptation and ate the fruit. And it was her who, as we'll see, it was her who seduced Adam. Adam wasn't Adam wasn't the guilty one. He didn't initiate eating the fruit. It was Eve, and then she gave it to him, and he ate it. Uh, and as a punishment in Genesis 3, we see God has punished women for this by saying, "I'll make your pains in childbearing very severe with painful labor, and you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Those are actual words from Genesis 3. Um, I Okay, this has been, of course, this has been treated differently through the history of the Christian church by different theologians, some trying to minimize it, some emphasizing it. So what can I tell you? It's a couple of thousand years of commentary on these passages, but I'm going to read you one of the earliest and, in my view, one of the most radical interpretations of this, which was important. I mean, people took this seriously. And this is Tertullian, who is about 100 years, I think, before Augustine, who we'll get to next time. And Tertullian says this. It's just kind of mind-blowing. Uh, he says, quote, "Do you not know that you are each an Eve?" Speaking, he's addressing women here. "You're all an Eve. Each one of you is an Eve. The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age." In other words, right now. "The guilt must of necessity live too. You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of the forbidden tree. You are the first deserter of the divine law. You are she who persuaded him who the devil was not valiant enough to attack. You destroyed so easily God's image, man, on account of your desert. That is, in other words, what you deserve, that is death. Even the Son of God had to die. My God. I mean, but this is Tertullian, who's not, he's not insignificant. He's somebody that people took seriously. Uh, that is the most severe passage I am aware of in theology. In other words, everything is Eve's fault. Adam is more or less passive and blameless in having eaten this tree, and because of her, and this goes back to original sin. Remember, original sin? I said the book ends of original sin are Eve does this, according to Tertullian, it's all because of Eve. They're thrown out of the garden evil, and every human being born since then inherits the original sin of Eve. And because of that, Jesus had to be sacrificed to redeem the sins of man. That is the story, I'm afraid. It is kind of the story. And the only difference is how much emphasis you put on Eve. Some people are more likely to spread it between Adam and Eve, but Tertullian wants to lay it all on her.
Well, well, first off, the Bible, if you create that story of Adam and Eve, that's essentially somebody after the fact creating a myth that supports the way the world goes on. So you can blame whoever you like, and if they didn't like women, it was going to be Eve's fault. On the other hand, you look at Adam and say, well, he's kind of, well, you didn't make much sense out of either. If you didn't, weren't supposed to do it, you did it too. In other words, it's hard to rationalize, to take one religion's kind of after the fact description of how they got to where they are and make a whole religious nature, to kind of carry that forward into original sin. I mean, and I really struggle with this one.
Well, I don't think you're I don't think you're alone, just judging about a million pages of theology devoted to this kind of stuff. I don't think you're the lone ranger here trying to figure it out. Remember, going back to the Euthyphro, the job of theology is to try to make all this stuff make sense, and it's not an easy lift. It's all I can tell you. Now I'm going to go. I from Tertullian. Now Tertullian is. I'm kind of being out of order here. I want to go back to the Bible and pull some quotes out of the Bible that kind of are along these same lines. I'm afraid. Let's see here. All right. Okay. Um, Okay, this is St. Paul in Corinthians. I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man. Women should be subservient to men in the household. This is Paul. Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Wives, submit yourself to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Uh, Submit yourself to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now that was in Ephesians. So far I've quoted from several letters: Corinthians, Colossians, Ephesians, and this is from Timothy. Now, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. So if you're a theologian, You have to account for all this stuff. You can't just us if you're going to uh, consider the Bible an authority, an unimpeachable authority, the Word of God. You can't just write this off but I imagine most people would like to. They just gloss over it because it's so out of tune with uh, well, most of us, I think. I don't know if it's out of tune with everyone. But anyway, if you see these traditional people talking about wives submitting, they have good scriptural uh, reason to do so. They're not talking out of nowhere. This is stuff that's right in the tradition. That's out of the Bible I was reading, word for word. That wasn't somebody's opinion of what the Bible said. That was the Bible. Okay. So now Augustine, oh, I didn't get him up here. Give me a second. I'm sorry. Uh, because Augustine is a guy who I'm not very fond of Augustine, frankly. I don't say that about very many of our philosophers, but I'll tell you why in a second. We are going to be talking about Augustine. Here's his story. He was born in North Africa. In fact, he Augustine may be the only person that we are going to study at all who was not white. He was most likely olive-skinned. He was born in North Africa, and then his mother was Saint Monica. Well, she's been sainted. She wasn't a saint then, and she was a devout Christian, but he was a follower of Mani, and we'll get to that later. But he grew up and was a precocious student in North Africa and very ambitious, and his mother was even more ambitious. And they moved to Milan, and this is part of the Roman Empire. Hippo was part of the Roman Empire, and he moves to Milan with his mother. Well, Augustine seems to have been a pretty randy young guy and running around with a lot of women, one of which became his common law wife. And by her, he had a son named Adeodatus. And Adeodatus and the wife apparently went to Milan with Monica and Augustine when Augustine was in his, say, early 20s or mid 20s or something like that. When they got to Milan, he became a student he was a teacher of rhetoric by that time and very well educated in the Greeks. And his, he wasn't a Christian, though. His mom tried to convert him to Christianity, and he didn't want to be a Christian because he thought the New Testament was written in really crappy Greek. He thought he thought it was, oh my God, these guys don't know how to write. That was really his reason. It was not sophisticated enough for him. But anyway, so what happens is his mother. This is a weird. It's it's hard for me not to judge it. I suppose I shouldn't, but what happens is his mother decides that his common law wife isn't good enough for him, and she wants to arrange for a society marriage with a woman who was a higher ranking person. And so Augustine agrees to this. This is the stuff, this is where we get into an area where I don't know. Augustine agrees to it and sends the mother of his child back to Africa. And the thing that really irks me about this is she's never mentioned. We don't know her name. He writes this big book called The Confessions. He never mentions this. He confesses to sins like stealing pears and being uh, prideful about his success as a student. But he never confesses to abandoning the mother of his child, for Christ's sake. I don't see how I would not have done that. I'd like to think I would not have done that. And I don't get to be a saint. How does Augustine get to be a saint? That's what I want to know. And his mother gets to be a saint for convincing him to abandon his wife and the mother of his child and marry somebody higher class. Who does that? And what kind of guy would kowtow to his mom who demands that he, just, it, it just appalls me. The whole thing appalls me. And even more appalling is the fact that he doesn't own up to it in the confessions. His whole book about confessing his weaknesses and sins and all that stuff, and never mentions that, oh, yeah, by the way. And actually, the only time he mentions it, he says it broke his heart. His heart. He said, oh, I was filled with grief and sorrow to see her go. What about her and the kid? For Christ's sake, it just is appalling. Anyway, uh, Augustine is what? Okay, so what happens is his mother arranges this marriage to a 12-year-old, and because of the customs of the day, the marriage couldn't be consummated until she was at the ripe old age of 14. And during that time, Augustine has concubines. They call them concubines and prostitutes. Holy moly. And so what is this little girl thinking? This little 12-year-old, he throws away his wife and then he's betrothed to her, but then he's just hanging out with all these other. And the Catholic Church, listen to this, the Catholic Church did not consider any of these relationships grounds for adultery. If he married this other woman, then those relationships don't count because they weren't sanctified by the church. They like don't exist. Whereas, whereas Paul says if you remarry, you've committed adultery. He says I didn't read that passage, but that's another one that if you can't remarry. It just can't. It isn't done, and I'm pretty sure that's still the rule with the Catholic Church. It might not be though. Any Catholics here that are up to snuff?
It's pretty much the rule. It depends on who your priest is,
Oh, so
but
it's
that's also why annulment exists.
yeah, right. Exactly, annulment.
And paradoxically, you can have a marriage annulled after many years, even if you have kids.
Right, and but the relationship between Augustine and his wife didn't even require an annulment.
Right. But they
It's
weren't
like doesn't exist.
right. Right. Well, anyway, yes, the official take on Catholics and marriage is that you can't remarry. But that would also depend on what country you're in, you know. Some countries are a lot stricter and more conservative about that kind of thing than others. Um, and there's a heck of a lot of Catholics who are divorced and remarried.
Well, of course,
A
but
lot.
okay. So Augustine, okay, what happens then is this poor 12-year-old, before the she turns 14, what happens is Augustine has an epiphany and becomes a Christian. At which point he calls off the wedding. This poor girl, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure I don't know what. We don't hear anything more about her, but it seems like that would be some kind of psychological trauma to be, anyway, I don't know what happened. But anyway, he has an epiphany, becomes a Christian, and eventually becomes the Bishop of Hippo and has an illustrious career as a Christian a writer. Now, let me read a little bit from him about interpretation of Christian teaching. In his commentary on Genesis, Augustine speculates as to how Adam, being already spiritual in mind, could have been led astray. He concludes that this was one of the reasons woman was given to man, woman who was of small intelligence and who perhaps still lives more in accordance with the promptings of the inferior flesh than the superior reason, that through her the man became guilty of transgression. Assuming woman's natural inferiority, Augustine asks, is this why the Apostle Paul does not attribute the image of God to her? Um, this is another guy writing about Augustine. Rosemary, another person, Rosemary Ruther, referring to Augustine's view that the relationship of the woman to man is similar to that of body to spirit, and to his conclusion that only the man possesses uh, the full image of God, calls this perhaps the ultimate core of misogynism. So these are foundational thinkers in Christianity. And uh, I'm going to move on next to Aquinas. And Aquinas more or less follows uh, uh, Aristotle, sorry, Aristotle, as you know. Aristotle says that men possess the facility of reason, whereas women do not, at least to the same extent or degree that men do. And so, therefore, this is Aristotle now, and Aquinas is a follower of Aristotle, and he's going to adopt that same idea, that hierarchical idea that women's intelligence isn't sufficient to have them be the head of the household, etc., etc. Let me see if I can find a couple of things by Aquinas now. Um, Aquinas says that females are inherently subordinate to males and that this subjection existed even before sin. And I'm going to explain that in a second. Female subordination for Aquinas is not a result of the fall, but part of the created order. Such female subordination, he argues, is actually for their own benefit and good. This is the same argument I just uh, alluded to with regard to colonization of native populations. Thomas adds that without female subordination, good order would have been lacking in the human family if some were not governed by others wiser than themselves. So, by such a subjection, a woman um, is naturally subject to man. So, by such a subjection, woman is naturally subject to man because in man the discretion of reason predominates. Uh, Among perfect animals, the active power of generation belongs to the male sex, the active power, and the passive power to the female. He gets this from Aristotle. And as among animals, there is a vital operation nobler than generation, to which their life is principally directed. Therefore, the male sex is not found in continual union with the female in perfect animals, but only at the time of coition. As regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten. For the active force in the male, this is again quoting from Aquinas now. For the active force in the male seed tends to the production of a perfect likeness in the masculine sex, while the production of woman comes from defect in the active force or from some material disposition or even from some external influence, such as that of the south wind, which is moist. Oh my God. Subjection is twofold. One is servile, by virtue of which a superior makes use of a subject for his own benefit. And this kind of subjection began after sin. Um, I don't want to go into the details of that, but there is another kind of subjection which is called economic or civil, whereby the superior makes use of his subject for their own benefit and good. And this kind of subjection existed before sin. Again, I don't think I'm going to elaborate on this, but maybe it's clear enough. For good order would have been wanting in the human family if some were not governed by others wiser than themselves. So, by such a kind of subjection, woman is naturally subject to man because in man the discretion of reason predominates. So, do any among you find this shocking? I mean, I must say that when I first read this stuff, I couldn't believe it was part of. By the way, we're going to get to Aquinas, but Aquinas is called the angelic doctor. His writings are the foundation of canon law to this day in Catholicism. He It's not like he's never been reinterpreted, but basically his main points are still the foundation. And we're going to get to this with regard to homosexuality, contraception, all that stuff comes from right from the teachings of Thomas Aquinas. So it's these aren't unimportant documents. And when I first read them, I thought it was jaw-dropping to me. Uh, Meredith, yeah.
I mean, I don't understand why this is jaw-dropping to you. I
It's
mean,
just so bold. It's not even cushioned at all. It's just so bold and so rigid.
well, it's just part of culture from forever that women are subordinate.
Well,
Women have
I'm
always been subordinate. That's the only reason there's ever a women's movement or women rise up in their own defense is because they have to fight for equality always.
well,
And
it's not.
if you certainly in the second wave feminism, we were told by our leaders that if you slough off and stop pushing, it'll just all go away because men assume that
No,
are uh, they get to be the bosses.
now, Meredith, you've said a whole lot of stuff there that I doubt can be empirically verified. The fact that you're saying that we were told by our leaders that is not evidence for anything. I was told by Trump that Mexicans are all rapists. That's not evidence. That's saying all the evidence is that's what your leader said. But it's not true. There are matriarchal societies among us today. I was in the San Blas Islands. The women inherit the land, they own the land, the men work the land for them. And there are societies that are matriarchal. I said, I think before you got here, Meredith, that I'm not going to try to sort all this out or establish direct cause and effect for anything. All I want to do is give you the background, the Christian background, and I'm not going to try to make the assumption that I understand what's going on now between women and men or has forever or anything like that. Doug, did you want to say something?
Well, were I a Freudian, I, I might say that Augustine, his conversion from whatever he was to a Christian, and all that happened thereafter might be related to guilt over the way he treated his son and common law wife, etc. I
You
don't
know, I must say I have the same response to Augustine. He's like a recovering alcoholic or something. Okay, I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm never going to drink again. I'm not going to be around people that drink. Blah blah blah. I don't know. It's tempting to make that kind of analysis of Augustine, but
well,
again,
yeah, it makes I mean, so the basis of Christianity is guilt. I don't know. That's
it you know we're not going to figure this out here in this
I'm just
class. Uh,
So can I just interrupt for a minute? I
sure.
agree with you about Augustine and women, but I wrote my dissertation on autobiography. The Confessions of Saint Augustine is the
You
first autobiography because he's the first writer who
yeah,
traced the development of
yeah.
soul, And then also, I got to stick up for his the last three books of the Confessions, the Meditations on Memory and Time, which I think are just absolutely like contemporary with how we think about time. So I got to stick up for him a little bit because I agree he's weird. His relationship with his mother was weird. I don't think it's right to ditch your common law wife and your son, but he's also a really important and thinker and sometimes really beautiful thinker.
Well, I don't disagree with that, and we're going to talk about it. This is just very broadly. I'm covering the ground of misogyny in Christianity, which is not something I'm going to cover from here on out. It's just this little session is dedicated to that. So
Oh, by
I'm
the way,
just
Peter says he's sorry he can't be here today. He
well,
said this
I'm sorry too.
he'll be here on Thursday probably, but he just like he had to go vote and do stuff like that. So now I'll be quiet.
Well, I'll be quiet. We're glad to see you, Ann, and we don't want you to be quiet. Uh, By the way, the discussion we're having now is why I avoid this kind of stuff in my philosophy classes because I can't. The, it just it becomes a flywheel, and everybody's has their own political views on this and their own experiences, and their which have shaped their probably opinions on the war of the sexes. Um, all I want to do is just give you this background of what really is part of the Christian. And one more thing to say about Meredith. Why was I shocked? Well, I wasn't taught any of this stuff when I was a young lad. I went to Sunday school. This was never shared with me that women were subordinate. Uh, Women were allowed to speak in church. I didn't have any of this. And
They
so when
don't
I,
they don't have to tell you, Tony. It just is. It's the status quo that men are superior and women are
I don't
subordinate.
know, I had women educators, women teacher that bossed me around and judged me.
Well,
I
sure, women can teach children. That's one of the traditional things women
Well, adults. I
can
had
do.
women at Pomona College. I was kind of an adult then.
Well, during the second wave women's movement, it had become clear to us that the anti-war movement was a, a place where men took charge of everything and the women made the coffee. And so
We
at
made the
that
coffee.
time, it was up to us to bring in our complaints about the way women get treated in modern society. And
Sounds
so,
like you're
Oh,
being educated now, Tony.
awesome. I want to
what?
talk
I'm
about it
sorry?
probably.
Sounds like you're being
I'm
educated
going to
now
be done in
by all.
about 10
No,
minutes.
I don't think so.
That's the whole story.
He's not going to listen to me.
No, it's just that it's not like I've never heard this before. That's what
Oh
I'm
yeah.
saying.
I
It's not
kind
like
of
this is brand new information to me. Uh, Ann or Doug, one of you speak up.
go ahead, Doug. Go ahead, but unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that um, the Gnostics had a really different attitude toward women, or at least somewhat different. And in the text on the creation of on the origin of the world, it's Eve actually gives life to Adam. It's not the rib. It's Eve breathes life into this inert form of Adam. So it would have been a really different situation if it.
It's weird. Athena was born out of the head of Zeus too. It's what is all this women being born out of some body part of men? That's a very strange myth.
One
I'm
thing
not going to
I'd
try
like
to
somebody to explain is how it is that the Catholic Church
how it
still
what?
has no women priests.
What, Meredith?
The Catholic Church, women cannot be priests.
Of course not. We just read St. Paul. What do
Paul.
you got? How are you going to contradict that?
Well, you could think about modern science. And
No, you'd have to disavow the Bible. You'd have to say that's not the word of God. You can't do that. If you're a Catholic and you're the Pope and you're responsible, you're descendant of St. Peter, you can't just give up the teachings of St. Paul. You can't do that. I'm not saying I agree with it, Meredith, or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's part of the doctrine of the Catholic Church, descended from Paul to Peter to Augustine to Aquinas and down to the present day, canon law. I don't know what the present papal edicts are on the authority of women, but I'm sure they can't be priests still. Anne, do you know?
Oh, no, I don't know. But I was just gonna stick up for the points that Meredith is making about, like, for instance, SNCC came under a lot of criticism because the women were mostly considered there to sleep with the guys and bring them food, No, seriously. And my own experience with getting hired at institutes of higher education. When I was hired at Virginia, I was one of 3 women hired because the federal government had said, if you don't hire some women, we're taking your federal funding. In a department of 50 plus tenured and tenure track people, there was one tenured female professor, one untenured female professor who was married to an untenured male professor. And then there were the three of us, none of whom got tenure. So I rest my case.
I'm not going to put myself in a position of trying to defend all the things that you've gone through in the last 50 years on Earth. And I'm not going to try to deny that women have been mistreated, my own sister among them, by a male society. So don't get me in that corner here. All I'm trying to do is tell you what the original document said. So I don't want to be defending the male gender here for everyone. That isn't my program here today. Now I'm seeing I I was very reluctant to bring this subject up, and now I'm questioning the wisdom of it
I
again.
think it's great that you brought it up because there's
Well,
a lot to talk about.
yeah, I know, but we could talk about this anytime. This is like the any topic, anytime can lead into a political discussion, but that I'm no better at that than anybody else here. Of course, I'm just maybe I know a little bit more about Aquinas. That's all I. Okay, Deborah.
Okay, I'm going to bail you out here, Tony, and
Oh,
change
thank you.
a little bit, but I've got some anecdotes, Meredith, and if you ever want to hear them about being a businesswoman. But anyway, um, did you say the guardians shared wives and shared children? Is that what I
Yeah,
heard?
in Plato's Republic.
Okay, so here's my question. What's the difference between sharing a wife and the statement, the guardians shared husbands?
Uh, that's a good point. In other words, you're saying why is it put
Yeah, it's a
in
little
that
misogynist.
related? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
why couldn't it have been put upside down? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that passage. Book 5 of the Republic, if you want to look it up. I doubt if you do, but if you wanted to look it up, Book 5 of the Republic is where he talks about the relationships
Mm-hmm.
within the guardians for family and so forth. The kids are also communally raised among the guardians. So if that's of interest to you, that's where it's found in that
Thank
book.
you.
Before we get off this, though, I want to. I've got a couple more points here to make. Um, Islam. In Islam, these are quotes from the Quran. Uh, Indeed, the Muslim men and Muslim women, the believing men and believing women, God has prepared them for them forgiveness and a great reward. Whoever does righteous deeds, whether male or female, while being a believer, we will surely grant them a good life. So that may, I didn't find in the Quran, in a quick search of the Quran, anything the equivalent of what we've just heard in the Bible. Although bear in mind that Islam considers the Old and New Testaments holy books. They just think they're flawed. They think they're still holy. They just think they're flawed in some regards. And then I also wanted to mention in Hinduism, the laws of Manu. The laws of Manu in Hinduism are kind of the equivalent, I would say, of Leviticus in the Old Testament. They're kind of political and ethical and gender structures. So I want to read something from the laws of Manu. Um, uh, a barren wife may be superseded in the 8th year. She whose children die in the 10th year. She who bears only daughters in the 11th year. But she who is quarrelsome without delay. I think that's kind of funny. Uh, okay, moving on to the cult of Mary. By the way, just let me clarify something that is often misunderstood. The Immaculate Conception isn't the virgin birth. Immaculate Conception is that Mary herself was conceived without intercourse between her father and mother. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, was also not conceived out of normal human reproduction. That's the Immaculate Conception. The virgin birth is the term for Jesus's birth, who was also not conceived from normal human reproduction, according to the Bible. Uh, So Mary um, is, and here's how she's treated basically. She's um, an ideal, it just in the cult of Mary, this is how she's treated within that cult. She's often used to reinforce patriarchal values, virginity, obedience, and motherhood. There's an idealization of submission and purity. Man, I can't talk. She's the virgin versus Eve, the sinner, reinforcing the Madonna whore dichotomy is what this commentator says. Clerical control. While Mary is venerated, her image is tightly controlled by male theologians and church authority, uh, which are all male, or who are all male. So even though there is a cult of Mary, Mary is subservient to herself is subservient to men, both in contemporary interpretation of what her meaning is, and uh, as a figure in the Bible, she was subservient to men. Um, okay, I that's all really I wanted to offer today. And as far as sorting out all of the uh, thousands of years of male dominance over females or whatever, I plead ignorance. I don't know how to account for that or to defend it or attack it or anything. I'd rather just not discuss it in this context. I can discuss it in any context you want except this one. I just think we're just going to spin off the rails. Uh, so any further oh, I think that there's a lot of hands up. Laurel has a hand up. Laurel, we can't hear you.
One of the interesting things is that even in the church, for example, the religious orders of women were subject to men, but it wasn't completely accepted even in the Catholic world. And I did not know for many years about the Beguines, a fascinating chunk of late medieval life and early Renaissance life. And I don't know, do folks here know about the Beguines? So they were women who did not, so if you think about a woman who doesn't want to marry in the say Middle Ages or early Renaissance, the options were not a lot. You know, you could sort of keep house for your brother or something like that, or take care of your elderly parents, or join a convent. But a number of women found an alternative path. They formed beguinages, which were sort of like convents, only not really religious and not subject to men. And they supported themselves by things like making lace, sewing, I don't know, whatever. And basically formed communities of women. There were a number of these in especially the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, I think some in France. And even into the 20th century, there have still been some in Belgium that were inhabited by, and there was an effort by the church to sort of try to take them under control somehow, and there was quite a bit of resistance. So I think the church managed to eliminate some of them over the years. But
What was their relationship to the church in general?
they were in Catholic countries, and so presumably the Beguines were women who were nominally at least Catholic, but they were not like a religious order subject to a male leader. And I visited such a beguinage in Bruges. They still had a couple of very elderly women living there, and they had their own little chapel, which presumably was visited by a priest from time to time, but they were not subject to the religious dominance of a male. So it was a really interesting little sidelight that not every woman wound up subject to some man, and that they had this little sort of side culture that persisted for a good many years despite efforts to kind of suppress it.
And yet they were Christian. I wonder how they dealt with the theological issues that we've referred to earlier here. Uh,
I suspect, like many women who knew that they were smarter than a lot of the men around, and uh, simply didn't confront the male hierarchy any more than they could
well,
help.
but I mean, how did they deal with scripture?
Um, I don't know. I suspect they tried to keep a low profile on such conversations, but it's a fascinating thing. If you the Beguines, um, it was it's an interesting little sidelight, and I don't think everyone in the Catholic world accepted this without um, some and Abelard, for example, obviously thought that Heloise was very bright because he sought her out as a student before seducing her.
Doug has just posted on the chat that that Meister Eckhart was close to the Beguines.
Yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that there was an actual collection of women who established a separate, non-subordinate life, and the one in Bruges is a lovely place. It's a beautiful, beautiful little setting, like a little abbey with its own little courtyard, beautiful gardens, and very peaceful, and not run by men. For what it's
Deborah's had her hand up, and what happened to Meredith? We chased her off. Deborah, go ahead. You
You're
need
mute.
to
You're mute.
unmute.
Actually, it was Bill, not I, and he says he changed his mind. So
Okay.
take a pass and go on, Mr. Smith.
All right, Gerald.
Yeah, six odd years ago, six odd decades ago, when I read through Genesis, I got a different story. What I read was, well, before the eating of the tree of knowledge, mankind did not know good from evil, and that in a way it was a graduation story out of kindergarten to moral responsibility. Now, to me, that's like somewhere that story got hijacked, but maybe I've misread that. I'm curious.
No, that's called the fortunate fall. No, seriously, I mean, the fortunate fall is that because man and woman fell, they had a chance to become moral beings. That shows up a lot in Renaissance literature. Felix culpa.
Oh, that's the Latin for it.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Hmm.
Felix culpa. That if Adam and Eve had never fallen, it'd be in a state of innocence, and there's value to being able to develop a moral nature, moral integrity, which you couldn't do if you had never sinned.
We're going to get into this with the problem of evil. Listen, just to reiterate, we're going through 2,000 years of intense conversations about every single word in the Bible, and we're not going to resolve them here. And so I had a very uh, humble objective today, and that was just to introduce these passages in foundational passages in the Bible and Augustine and Aquinas, just to broach the subject. We won't be spending a lot of time on this, I guarantee you. I'm too intimidated by the subject to actually try to undertake this. I'm sure there are plenty of contexts in which it would be welcome, but we're just going to try to forge ahead. So anyway, next time, and maybe you can help me out on this. Next time, we're going to talk about Augustine, and specifically in Augustine, the problems I want to, once again, we're trying to make sense of things and not so much to discuss what the church's position. Augustine tries to solve two problems, and we're going to assess whether they can be solved the way he suggests. One is the problem of evil that I think we mentioned with regard to Epicurus. Epicurus is the guy that originated this problem, which is if God is omniscient, omnipotent, and benign, why is there evil in the world? Augustine's going to have the most famous answer to that. And then the other thing we're going to address of Augustine's is foreknowledge or predestination, uh, and how man can be free, how you can be free to sin And at the same time, God knows what you're going to do. Well, how are you free then? How does that work? And if you're not free, how are you guilty? Those are the issues we're going to discuss next time. Did somebody else have their, it seemed like somebody else had their hand up
Oh, I just
too.
wanted to ask, because a lot of you guys live in California and I live in the deep South. So, when you were talking about the whole teaching about wives being subservient and so on, are you encountering a lot of trad wife thinking these days? Because it's pretty active in the South. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Traditional wife.
Let me ask Teresa. Um, I'm kidding. I don't think the trad wife role would fit very comfortably with her.
Well,
Let's
no,
put it that way. I don't actually hear a lot about it, and I suspect it's because you're in Mississippi.
I
Hey,
suspect
I wanted to ask you something, Ann. Yeah, there's Teresa. Are you a trad wife?
she's mute.
You're
You're
muted.
mute.
Hello.
No? Okay. Uh,
I unmuted myself.
the question was, are you a trad wife?
Am I a what?
Trad wife, a traditional wife. Now, don't laugh at that.
No.
I didn't really expect her to say, yes, I'm very obedient and servile and do anything Tony tells me to do. I didn't really expect that answer.
Well, in a way, I mean, I do most of the cooking. I make the bed. I do the laundry. So, yeah, but you do the gardening. You do the hard stuff.
Hard stuff. But let's just let her think that it's all the
Okay.
hard stuff. And I wanted to ask you uh, whether your new status as the poet laureate and the consequent more public exposure is going to result in anything uncomfortable for you or more controversy or anything.
Well, we'll know. I'll find out when I do it. But, I was a little bit surprised that the governor chose me. Um, I mean, the things that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be working with kids in schools. I'm going to be working with communities, doing sort of community-based poetry projects. And I'm going to do a series of podcasts enlisting my friends who are poets or lovers of poetry to choose a poem that they dearly love and read it and talk about the writer, and then make kind of little lesson plan things for schools. So those are my three big projects. And um, we'll just have to see. I mean, none of us knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years, you know? But and I'm going to be talking about eco poetry, which is what got my trip to Turkey canceled, as you know. So we'll just have to see what happens, you know? But I'm going to just sail in there and do it and see what happens.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Okay.
not going to choose the raunchiest poems that I know or the most militant poems that I know. I'll sort of be mindful of my certain boundaries of my audience. But
Well,
we'll
I want to ask, does everybody know that Anne is the co-editor now of a second edition of Eco Poetry? I have a copy and I've given one away to a friend of mine who's also.
Yeah, you guys, please check it out. It is gorgeous. It's called Attached to the Living World, a new eco poetry anthology. And it's got American eco poetry since 2010 by authors who were not in the first volume. And then there's a few people who are not American citizens, like Samyak Shurtak and Hamad Hussein Ahmed, who have been in the States for a long time, like getting their MFA or their PhD. So it's like a really, really diverse collection of poetry. Don't you think, Meredith?
Yes, absolutely.
All kinds of writers, all kinds of styles, all kinds of concerns. And there's a lot of pretty politically engaged poetry in it, one way or another. So please check it out. It's from Trinity University Press, and the cover is absolutely drop dead gorgeous.
Who
It
did
is
the cover?
gorgeous.
Thank you. You know, I'm sorry, Anne. I just wanted to say when you were in California, I don't remember where I was, but I was not in California visiting. When you were visiting, I mean, I was off somewhere else. So I really regret that. But I have your book sitting on a side table in our home, and one of your books. I don't know how many you've published, but I'm really glad to learn about Attached to the Living World. And
So beautiful.
congratulations on
Thank
your laureate status. My goodness.
you. So I'm pretty sure that Joyce Jenkins is going to invite me to the Watershed Poetry Festival in Berkeley next fall. And if so, I will be inviting everybody to come to it, you know.
Excellent.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
More comments, questions, remarks, assassinations of Tony.
Tony, it was fascinating.
No.
It was really fascinating. You know, you don't expect all of us sassy women to agree with everything you say.
Well, I
Honest to
won't
talk.
stand responsible for the things I read. I was just reading them so
I know.
we'd have all a background in some of the foundational texts. I don't mean to defend them in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying
Tony,
that's what it was.
one problem with the foundational texts is they're all written by men.
Of course.
Well, of course, I know, but as Churchill said, history is going to treat me kindly because I plan to write it. And he did. So,
Well, I
yeah,
had
if the men write everything, then where do the women get a voice?
I had this in all my years of teaching, I had two students walk out, one in a rage and one in a demonstration, and it was hilarious. No, one of them wasn't
Hilarious,
hilarious.
huh?
I At the beginning of every semester, I would apologize on behalf of the tradition of Western philosophy that there weren't women were not represented, and I said that the problem is if I have to, include Aspasia or um, Simone de Beauvoir. There aren't a lot of women. They were kept out of academia, of course, just like in every other field for a couple of thousand years. And I would apologize for it, and I would say I can't remove Aquinas to put in a woman. And the reason for this is because this is just this is stuff you need to know. I don't care if you're a woman or not. And the women who are philosophers, prominent philosophers now know this stuff. In other words, they've studied this stuff, so they know what to be arguing against. And so one girl just got up. This is the first day of class. She just got up and stomped out and said, "So it's a boys' club then. Screw you," and left. And I thought, okay, that's fair enough. Although you're one of the people that's not a good candidate to fight the war because you're not going to know anything you're fighting against. I didn't say that, of course, because I'm not an idiot. Oh no, I am an idiot. But and then the second person that stomped out was also a woman, but she did it for a different reason. I was talking about existentialism, and this wasn't the same class. This is probably 15 years apart. I was talking about existentialism, trying to hammer home the point that you're free at every second of the day to change everything you do. And we were reading Kierkegaard at the time. And I said, right now, you could just get up out of your seat, go down to the airport, put your credit card down, buy a ticket to Bolivia, and become a potter and completely turn your back on the rest of your life. You could do that. There's nothing stopping you right now from doing that. So this girl got up and walked out of the room. I thought, great, excellent demonstration. But she was an excellent student though, so there was nothing. The other girl didn't come back. She was done. She said, "Okay, I'm not going to be part of this." That's one response.
I have to go, Tony.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Barry.
Bye,
We'll
Barry.
see
See
you
you,
on
everybody.
Thursday, I hope.
Yep, I'll be here.
Let's go.
Bye,
Um,
everybody. See
Bye,
ya.
everybody.
Thanks, Tony.
Tony, you know what they say about messengers, that there's
yeah, don't shoot the
something
messenger.
inherently
You gotta
dangerous
go.
thing.
Right.
I think it was brave of you to admit that you weren't aware of this before. And I appreciated that somebody actually was willing to say, this may have been going on, and people may have found it, said all this stuff, but it wasn't out in the open growing up. And it was surprising because some of us didn't actually know that it was being said, or that, well, we get things said to us like, oh, you're a girl, you can't be that good at math. Okay, go ahead, watch me. But it's 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 instructive to hear the actual words and realize how seriously these men took themselves.
Right.
In spite of being surrounded by women, some of whom must have been visibly smarter than they were.
I would think so. I
But
you know,
Laurel, the thing is, women weren't educated, pretty much. In the societies where men did all the writing and were the ones who finished school and did the teaching, women weren't educated. And so they weren't considered part of the intellectual life that the men were living.
There were
And so
a
they
Well,
just,
yeah, but I'm going back to what Laurel says. That may be true, but you can tell people who are smarter than you are.
well,
They
and
don't have to be educated to know, to recognize they kind of figured that out a lot faster than I did. You know?
who managed to make it through the hurdles and get an education, and there were a few,
Yeah.
had to be really persistent and pretty bright to get past the barriers that were put up. So you'd sort of think that they were aware that there were some pretty smart women. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see more details. And I'm sorry to miss the first half, but I was Alzheimer's-ing, and
Alzheimer's? She means Alzheimer's.
well, I was on a conference call doing Alzheimer's business, and every call of these we're discussing the orcs and what the horrible people are doing to research now, and what do we have to do to evade it. And the mind boggles. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's just disarm ourselves and throw all the educators out and become a third world country. That's smart.
yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
whose idea was that? Anyway, any other
Yeah.
getting back to our subject today, any other comments, criticisms, and so forth?
Looking forward more soon. Thanks, Tony.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we will see you all on Thursday. Lovely to see you as always, and we'll continue with Augustine on Thursday.
And you'll
Okay.
keep us posted on beach cleaning too, so that's a whole separate thing.
What's that?
Beach cleaning. You're keeping
Oh
us.
yeah, I'll keep you up to date on that. I'll get a date for us, and we'll go down and this isn't so much cleaning; it's sampling for plastics. So it's a different
Looking at your event.
project.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
All right, guys,
Okay.
we'll see you on Thursday.
Thanks, Tony.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.